Awesome to just watch you guys connect with each other, sharing what's happening this summer, all the stuff that you guys are up to. If you're new with us, my name is Phil, one of the pastors here at Hope City. We're continuing our series on Exodus today. Next week, as you guys have heard, we're not at VCS. We're at Nat Bailey Stadium for the baseball game. If you don't have tickets, they are all sold out on the Vancouver Canadians website, but if you go on StubHub, which I did this morning, and I also went on Game Time, there are tickets available there. The trick with Game Time is the closer you buy to the start time for the game, the cheaper they will be, okay? So right now I looked and I was like, oh, that's extortion. I'm not gonna pay that, right? But for those of you who still wanna join us for the baseball game, tickets are available. Just look on StubHub and on Game Time. Hope to see you guys there. But enough about baseball. We're going to get to the Bible. I warn you, we're going to ask you to stand with me for the reading of God's word, but it is a very long passage. So if at any point you decide to take a seat, no one is judging, okay? We're not doing that. But just the reason why we're going to stand for the reading of God's word is this is our way of paying attention and engaging and honoring the reading of God's word. All right? If you could stand with me if you're able and if you're willing. This is a long passage. We're looking at Exodus 7, verses 14, all the way to chapter 10, verse 29. I should have probably told you that before I asked you to stand, but here we are. We're going to try this together. This is how it reads. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river. Confront him on the bank of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you to say to you, let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die, and the river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. The Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. But the Egyptian magicians did the same things by their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went into his palace and did not take even this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water, because they could not drink the water of the river. 7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country. The Nile will teem with the frogs. They will come up into your palace and your bedroom and onto your bed, into the houses of your officials and on your people, and into your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will come up on you and your people and all your officials. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the streams and canals and ponds, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. But the magicians did the same things by their secret arts. They also made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord." Moses said to Pharaoh, "I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you and your officials and your people, that you and your houses may be rid of the frogs, except for those that remain in the Nile." "Tomorrow," Pharaoh said. Moses replied, "It will be as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you and your houses, your officials and your people. They will remain only in the Nile." After Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs he had brought on Pharaoh. And the Lord did what Moses asked. The frogs died in the houses, in the courtyards, and in the fields. They were piled into heaps, and the land reeked of them. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground. And throughout the land of Egypt, the dust will become gnats." They did this, and when Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff and struck the dust of the ground, gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. But when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not. Since the gnats were on people and animals everywhere, the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen, just as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning and confront Pharaoh as he goes to the river and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you do not let my people go, I will send swarms of flies on you and your officials, on your people, and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians will be full of flies. Even the ground will be covered with them. But on that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen, where my people live. No swarms of flies will be there, so that you will know that I, the Lord, am in this land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. This sign will occur tomorrow." And the Lord did this. Dense swarms of flies poured into Pharaoh's palace and into the houses of his officials. Throughout Egypt, the land was ruined by the flies. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Go, sacrifice to your God here in the land." But Moses said, "That would not be right. The sacrifices we offer the Lord our God would be detestable to the Egyptians. And if we offer sacrifices that are detestable in their eyes, will they not stone us? We must take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God as he commanded us." Pharaoh said, "I will let you go to offer sacrifices to the Lord your God in the wilderness, but you must not go very far. Now pray for me." Moses answered, "As soon as I leave you, I will pray to the Lord, and tomorrow the flies will leave Pharaoh and his officials and his people. Only let Pharaoh be sure that he does not act deceitfully again by not letting the people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord." Then Moses left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord did what Moses asked. The flies left Pharaoh and his officials and his people. Not a fly remained. But this time also Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the people go. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die.' The Lord set a time and said, 'Tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land.' And the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'Take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on people and animals throughout the land. So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it in the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so that they may worship me, or this time I will send the full force of my plagues against you and against your officials and your people, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. You still set yourself against my people and will not let them go. Therefore, at this time tomorrow, I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt, from the day it was founded till now. Give an order now to bring in your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every person and animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die.' Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside, but those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and their livestock in the field. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Stretch out your hand toward the sky, so that hail will fall all over Egypt, on people and animals and on everything growing in the fields of Egypt.' Then Moses stretched out his staff towards the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed down to the ground. So the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Hail fell and lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. The only place it did not hail was the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. 'This time I have sinned,' he said to them. 'The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Pray to the Lord for we have had enough thunder and hail. I will let you go. You do not have to stay any longer.' Moses replied, 'When I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands in prayer to the Lord. The thunder will stop and there will be no more hail, so that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But I know that you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God.' The flax and barley were destroyed, since the barley had headed and the flax was in bloom. The wheat and spelt, however, were not destroyed because they ripened later. Then Moses left Pharaoh and went out of the city. He spread out his hands towards the Lord. The thunder and the hail stopped, and the rain no longer poured down on the land. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and hail and thunder had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. So Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had said to Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to Pharaoh, for I've hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, that you may know that I am the Lord.' So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses and those of all your officials and all the Egyptians, something neither your parents nor your ancestors have ever seen from the day they settled in this land till now. Then Moses turned and left Pharaoh. Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?" Then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. "Go, worship the Lord your God," he said. "But tell me, who will be going?" Moses answered, "We will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, and with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord." Pharaoh said, "The Lord be with you if I let you go, along with your women and children. Clearly, you're bent on evil. No, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you have been asking for." Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. And the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over Egypt so that the locusts swarm over the land and devour everything growing in the fields, everything left by the hail." So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land all day and all that night. By morning, the wind had brought the locusts. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now forgive my sin once more and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me." Moses then left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord changed the wind to a very strong west wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or move about for 3 days. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go, worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you. Only leave your flocks and herds behind." But Moses said, this is a long passage, and even the mic system did not survive. I have some, oh, it's back. It did survive. But Moses said, "You must allow us to have the sacrifices and burnt offerings to present to the Lord our God. Our livestock too must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind. We have to use some of them in worshiping the Lord our God. And until we get there, we will not know what we are able to use to worship. We do not know what we are to use to worship the Lord." But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. Pharaoh said to Moses, "Get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." "Just as you say," Moses replied, "I will never appear before you again." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. I don't think we're going to ever read such a long passage and have you guys stand for that ever again, but it was worth trying things for a very first time. So kudos to you who did that with us. I don't know about you, but this is one of the strangest collections of miracles that we see in the Bible. And the Bible is full of miracles, some of which I'm a huge fan. We talk about Jesus turning water into wine. Jesus would be welcome anywhere. He would be the ultimate wedding guest. Jesus feeding 5,000 with just a small boy's lunch of 5 pita and 2 dried fish. This is the original Alpha Course happening, right? Jesus causing the blind to see, touching the leper, not just healing the leper, but touching the leper and making him clean. Jesus healing the paralyzed man whose friends dug through the roof, kind of like what we're seeing right now, just upstairs. If you go upstairs, you see, construction happening, things falling from the sky. That's what it was like for folks who were bringing their friend to Jesus, but they had to get him to Jesus. He has not walked maybe all his life or in a long time, and they were desperate for healing. They would do anything. Jesus heals him. These are miracles of healing and restoration. And recently, just to share honestly with you, I am particularly drawn to these miracles, especially the ones where parents are bringing their children to Jesus and asking for healing. These hit differently now as I read them. Some of you know, but Mike has been dealing with a knee injury for a while now. And we finally got the MRI, and we find out he's got cartilage that's coming off the bone. And we finally saw a surgeon, and there is no quick surgical fix. And I don't know about you, but as a parent, I am feeling quite helpless right now. And so I understand the impulse of what parents would do when I read this, people bringing their children to Jesus for healing. And some of you have done that. Some of you also understand that impulse. Miracles of healing and restoration, that we understand, that we can get with. But the miracles that we just read are different. They're strange. They're miracles of judgment. We have water turned not into wine, but into blood. We have an invasion of frogs. We have dust turned into lice, which, for those of you who have young children in elementary school, that is a parent's nightmare right there, right? And instead of healing and restoration, we have boils. And we didn't read about it today because I think, if I read the 10th plague and got there, we would all be like falling down or something. But we're going to get there, but the 10th plague is coming. It gets stranger and stranger, harder and harder. Nowhere else in the Bible do we see such a unique display of God's judgment. So we need to ask, why would God send such a strange mix of plagues? And why 10 in total? I know now that we're just going to deal with 9 for today. As God proclaimed in today's passage, he could have easily crushed Egypt and freed the Israelites with just one plague, perhaps just intensifying the hailstorm to catastrophic proportions where it would start taking out buildings and just be done with the entire rescue operation after one plague. Why did he not do that? I think there's a profound reason why God performed so many powerful and peculiar miracles here, these signs and wonders. He didn't just send the plagues merely to free the Israelites or to punish Egypt as a nation or Pharaoh for enslaving his people. There are some clues from the book of Exodus itself as to why all these strange plagues. The first one comes after the Exodus, Exodus 12:12. It reads like this, God saying, on that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. This is right before the Exodus, actually, not right after, right before the Passover. God gives a reason for why he's doing what he's doing. He's saying, I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. And here's what we need to know about Egypt at this point. Egypt at that time was the world's most dominant superpower. It had one of the most complex and widespread ancient religious systems. So through these plagues, God was not just punishing a political power, but he was addressing and punishing a religious power as well. Through the plagues, God was freeing the people of Israel, not just from their slavery to Egypt, this physical slavery of bondage to Egypt, but he was freeing them from their religious and spiritual slavery to Egypt as well. They were captive not only physically in body, they were captive spiritually in terms of their mind and their heart. Here's what we need to know about the people of Israel by the time they get to these 10 plagues. By the time Moses was born, the people of Israel were a slave people. They had lost their identity and they had lost their calling. They are captive physically. Their bodies belong to Pharaoh, but they were captive spiritually as well. Hearts and minds belonged to the gods of Egypt. And I'll show you this just in a moment. And perhaps just to pause and pull back a little bit and reflect on how this has to do with us in the here and now. Perhaps we resonate with this in some way. That collectively as a church, we're in the process of rewriting our mission, our vision, our values. We are asking God, help us to rediscover our identity and our calling once again. After 10 years as a church, we've been through highs, been through lows, especially coming out of the pandemic. There is confusion as to who we are and what we're called to do. It is not merely good enough for us to survive. We need to be about what God has called us to do. That is what thriving looks like. And perhaps if we pull back even one more step and we think about this as individuals, as followers of Jesus, sometimes we go through the motions for so long that we don't even realize that we have lost our first love for God. We lose our purpose. We lose our reason. It is so easy to adopt the values of the culture that we live in. And maybe that has happened for the people of Israel. They've lived in Egypt for 400 years up to this point. By the time God brings his people out of Egypt, it's been 400 years of a culture that does not acknowledge or accept the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 400 years living in a culture where people live for everything other than the very specific calling that God gave Abraham and his family. That he would bless them, make them a nation, and as a nation, they would be a blessing to the rest of the world. This was God's original mission for his people, that they may be part of him reversing the curse of sin and death. So the Israelites had likely just become like the people that they live with. How do we know this? If we go back to Genesis 2, verses 23 to 25, it reads like this. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. I want you to notice here that when the Israelites in their slavery cried out for deliverance, they did not cry out to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They merely cried out for help. That it's generic. If there is a God, or if a God would have mercy on us, one of the many that the Egyptians worship, if there is a God that would have mercy on us, come and help us. This says nothing about the people of Israel remembering God, but rather that God heard their generic cry and remembered them, remembered the covenant he made with them. These were people who were seeking help generically, in general, from any God that would help them. But I think what we find in the Bible is this kind of good news, that they didn't even know who to cry out to in their misery. but God still heard their cry. God was moved with compassion. He came to the rescue. And this tells you and me that when we cry out to God, we don't even have to have all our theology lined up properly, that he is so attuned to human misery and suffering that he hears and he remembers and he sees and he will do. He will rescue. We just need to ask for help. He sorts out all the theological stuff later after he's rescued them. In fact, the 10 plagues is the Sunday school lesson on theology that is in order for his people to understand who he is. God hears us when we cry out to him. In fact, as we soon learn in Exodus that, right after he had rescued them, right after he had brought them out of Egypt, when Moses told them that right after he had brought them out of Egypt, when Moses went on Mount Sinai to find out what God's calling was for them, and he was gone a little too long, and they thought that perhaps something had happened to Moses, their leader, and they needed another leader because whatever God that had brought them out of Egypt clearly had not protected Moses enough to bring him back to them. What did they do? They made gods for themselves, calves. These are the gods of Egypt. They reverted back to the gods that they worshiped before. So these were people that were steeped in their culture, and God is seeking not only to rescue them in body out of slavery and captivity out of Egypt, he is trying to rescue their minds and their hearts out of spiritual captivity. They have already given themselves to other gods. And so the 10 plagues matter. These 10 plagues is God not just showing his superiority to Pharaoh and to the gods of Egypt. This is God teaching his people who the God of their rescue truly is. He is not one of the gods of the pantheon of Egypt. He is above and beyond them. He is different. And so these 10 plagues, we're going to look at them right now. Each of these plagues was designed to add together collectively to communicate to the Egyptians and to the Israelites who the God of Israel is. First, by differentiating him from the gods of Egypt, and then by elevating him above and beyond who they are. So the first plague, we have water to blood. God used the first plague to strike Egypt's most important resource, which is the river Nile. The Nile provided Egypt with this constant source of fresh water in the Middle East, in the desert, in North Africa. It is this nutrient-rich floodplain that is created, this Nile Delta, where it became known as Egypt's breadbasket. This was the reason why they were an economic superpower at that time. This is why they could survive a local famine. During the Nile, turning the Nile into blood was also a targeted attack on one of Egypt's most important gods, Osiris. Osiris was the chief god of the Nile. He was the one who gave life to the Egyptian empire. He was the god of fertility, of vegetation, of agriculture, all the things in order to have a good GDP. When God turned the Nile into literal blood, the river instead became a source of death and suffering. Even though Egypt's magicians could replicate the plague, they could not reverse it. Even though they begged their God to reverse it, they could not. This was the first act, which was to dethrone Osiris and destabilize Egypt's economic security. This is where a superpower finds its security, is in its economics. And God was destabilizing that and also dethroning the God of agriculture all at the same time. That's the first plague. Second plague is this invasion of frogs. And frogs seem super random to us. My kids for a while wanted a lizard, right? And we went to, PetSmart, right? And their salesperson actually, like, we had everything ready. We were about to check out. And she persuaded us not to buy the lizard. And to this day, we are so thankful. Okay, because sometimes we pet sit for friends who have a lizard, and we're like, this is so much work. And I know who that work would fall to, right? Not one of my 3 children. But anyways, those of you who like lizards, right, and would buy them or would even buy frogs, you're like, what is up with this? Why would this be so bad? Well, here's the thing. For the Egyptians, there is a god of childbirth and a god of midwifery. And this was also the god of resurrection. And this god, Heket, was symbolized by the frog. All right? So for Egyptians, as soon as they see a frog, they're thinking of that god, right? Or that realm of that god's responsibility of power. For the Israelites, do not forget that Pharaoh had ordered all newborn males to be killed by midwives. The midwives said no to that. And after the midwives had said no, he got his entire population involved in throwing all newborn baby Hebrew boys into that Nile. This is a callback. God is saying, I have not forgotten, Pharaoh, about what you have done to my people. I'm going to reverse what you have done. I'm going to cause Egypt to be overrun by symbols of childbirth, symbols of midwifery, symbols of resurrection that are now pouring out of the Nile. You've thrown our baby boys into the Nile. I'm going to reverse that with all the frogs, all the signs of resurrection, all the signs of childbirth, all the signs of life overwhelming you. This is direct judgment on Egypt's genocide of Hebrew baby boys. And also, this is God dethroning Heket. You are the God of childbirth? I think not. You are the God who can control midwives? Absolutely not. These ones do not belong to you. Next plague, we have dust to gnats. This Hebrew word translated as gnats is only used in this context, so it's incredibly hard to determine exactly which critter we're talking about. It could be fleas, it could be ticks, it could be mosquitoes, it could be lice. Lice is what I'm afraid of most, but it also is what the Egyptians are afraid of most, okay? This is a critter, again, that digs into your skin. It's a parasite. And as a result of this plague, all the dust literally came alive. The ground came alive with these parasites, jumping with them. This plague was a direct assault on the realm of this Egyptian god, Geb. It was his responsibility to make sure the land was not chaotic, that things were as they were supposed to be. But this is also a plague that is aimed at one particular part of Egyptian society, even though everyone was covered by the lice and bitten by them, and it was probably terrible. I can't imagine anything worse. If I were Pharaoh, I would have tapped out at this, right? Just let all the people go, right? It's horrific. But for Egyptians' religious leaders, the priests and the magicians, they went to actually extreme lengths to keep themselves clean and pure, especially of things like lice. Egyptian priests would actually remove their eyebrows. It wasn't just because it looked better. They would remove their eyebrows, they would remove their eyelashes, anything that could host parasites. The priests would shave their body all over every other day to prevent lice. They would bathe 4 times a day, twice during the day in cold water, and twice during the night also in cold water to ward off lice. It should be noted that it was with this plague that the Egyptian magicians admitted defeat. This is the finger of God. We tap out here. We have had enough. God was dethroning Geb, the god of the earth, defeating the priests and the magicians at the same time. And then we have the swarm of flies. Flies and beetles were popular charms in Egypt. It served as a symbol of relentless determination and bravery, right? Anyone who has tried and failed at swatting a fly that's in your house somewhere knows this. Egyptian soldiers were decorated with a pendant known as the Order of the Golden Fly. Determination, bravery, relentlessness. The Egyptian goddess Wadjet was associated with these flies. And so it's hard to imagine that after this plague, Egyptians would be thinking fondly of flies. These aren't our normal household flies. These are more like horse flies, like blood-sucking flies that's why we don't live in Winnipeg. I'm sorry, anyone who is from Winnipeg. Some of these flies can be carrying disease as well. And so what made this plague different is that this plague was only for the Egyptians. The land of Goshen, where God's people were at, there were no flies. God not only is distinguishing himself over and above the gods of Egypt, he is making it clear, I am the God of the Hebrews. Even if they don't remember me, I am their God. To help those hardened Egyptians' hearts really see that none of this is a coincidence. It's to teach Pharaoh and the Egyptians that the Lord God of Israel was in Egypt doing this, even though it's not his home turf. He is doing this on their territory. At the end of this plague, we have Wadjet defeated. At the end of this plague, Pharaoh agrees to release the Israelites for the first time, which is totally ironic, given that the fly is the symbol of unrelenting Egyptian determination. But as we know, he changes his mind again, right? Once the swarm of flies leave. He's used to manipulating people. He's used to being the person in charge. He is like a god in Egypt. Next, we have the death of livestock. Egypt had a lot of animal gods, but this plague most directly affected the cattle gods, with cattle being the significant animals in the Egyptian religious worldview. The cow god, or the cow goddess, Hathor, was seen as a mother to Pharaoh. Another famous cow god was Apis, a bull, and that bull actually symbolized Pharaoh himself. There was only one such physical bull, Apis bull, that could exist at any one time. And when it died, it was mourned as if Pharaoh himself had died. And according to scripture, in this plague, all livestock in the field that belonged to the Egyptians were killed, while the livestock that belonged to the Israelites was spared. We don't know this, but perhaps the Apis bull was killed. I'm not sure if this happened or not. Either way, this was a plague that was designed to dethrone Hathor and Apis, and it was also, again, God was emphasizing that Yahweh is Israel's God. We have the epidemic of boils next. As a result of this plague, the entire nation of Egypt could no longer stand. It wasn't just the Egyptians who could no longer stand. This is an epidemic of boils, and it was a direct attack on the many Egyptian deities that had to do with health, healing, and medical knowledge. I'm not going to name all of them for you here. This epidemic also attacked the medical institution of the Egyptians. They were well known for their knowledge of medicine, surgery, dentistry. It was a source of pride for all the Egyptians. But I want to point out that the way that this plague was initiated is significant as well. Moses takes ash from a furnace and he tosses it in the air. The significance of this would not be lost to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh had exploited the Israelites by forcing them to make bricks. And in order to make bricks, you need to not only form the bricks, but you need to fire the bricks in a kiln, in a furnace. This type of work, if you've ever watched any videos of people working close to a kiln, Sometimes there's videos of people doing this in more like third world developing countries. And there's someone who is very close, to the kiln itself, putting things in and out. And there's someone else, not on camera, but they are constantly scooping water and tossing it on them. Okay? I want to be that guy. Okay? Or maybe they have to switch after a while, because it'd only be fair. But this type of work is not just crippling work, dangerous work. This is blistering work as well. So the boils, the tossing of the soot in the air from the furnace, this is not just God defeating the gods of health, healing, and medicine. This is God judging Pharaoh and Egypt for ruthlessly oppressing and exploiting his people. Next, we get the hailstorm. This is a plague that destroyed everything and everyone who's not covered by shelter. The plague was an attack on the Egyptian sky goddess Nut, whose responsibility it was to protect the land from heavenly destruction. Don't let things from the sky fall down and destroy things or people. Obviously, Nut is not in charge. But there is a place where it seemed like things were okay, and that's Goshen, where the Israelites were. We find out with this plague that Pharaoh starts growing desperate. This is the first time he actually admits sin. Whether this is just a rhetorical or negotiation tactic, we don't know. He admits sin. He recognizes the supremacy of Israel's God. But perhaps there's reason to this. Perhaps it's because in ancient Egypt, the role of the Pharaoh is to be an intermediary between the people and the gods. The Pharaoh was responsible for cosmic order, making sure that the gods do their job so that the people, his people, are not affected. And clearly, when you have things falling out of the sky, destroying property, people, and animals, he is no longer in charge. So Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron. He says, "This time I've sinned. The Lord is right. And my people and I are in the wrong. Pray to the Lord. We have had enough of the thunder and hail, and I will let you go. You don't have to stay any longer." Moses prays. Pharaoh says that the rain, hail, and thunder have stopped, and when he sees that, he sins again. He and his officials hardened their hearts, just as the Lord had said to Moses. We have locusts next. With this plague, everything that the hailstorm did not destroy, the locusts took care of. They just stripped everything bare. This is a plague that strikes at a number of Egyptian crop deities, grain gods like Nippur and Nepri. With the total destruction of crops, Egypt now faced the prospect of starvation. Pharaoh's officials basically say, "Let the people go. Do you not realize that Egypt is now ruined?" Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron and once again confesses his sin, begs for the plague to be removed. Moses prays. Not a locust is left anywhere in Egypt. But once that is over with, the Lord hardens Pharaoh's heart and he would not let the Israelites go. We get this plague of darkness. At the top of the pantheon of Egypt's gods stood Ra, the all-powerful sun god. He is not just God of the sun, but God of the gods. He has power over all the other gods. And so this plague of darkness is a direct attack on Ra himself. Darkness was a warning to Pharaoh, who is seen by the Egyptians as the son of Ra, son of the sun itself. And what made this extremely strange is that while the Egyptians were covered in a blanket of darkness, the land of Goshen of the Israelites was actually bathed in warm light. And so Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron and orders them to leave Egypt to worship, but they must leave all their animals behind. Pharaoh is too used to being in charge. He's too used to being like a god walking among mortals. He's too used to having his way. They must leave their animals behind. Moses refuses. The Lord hardens Pharaoh's heart. He has Moses and Aaron thrown out from his presence, threatens them with death if they ever appear before him again. And so here we are after the 9 plagues. We'll get to the 10th one when we come back. But we see that this is not just for the physical rescue of Israel, I'm sorry. What we see here is a systematic takedown of the political, economic, and religious power of Egypt and its Pharaoh. The 10 plagues are both for Pharaoh and the Egyptians, but I believe it's also for the Israelites. For the Egyptians, these plagues come to a people who think they have every reason to be secure in their destiny. They are the most powerful civilization on earth. Their security and prosperity is anchored by the waters of the Nile, that very first plague, and the power of the sun, the god of the sun. The first and the 9th plagues directly attack the strongest pillars of their security. But again, for the Israelites, why all of these plagues? I really believe it's to free them not only physically, it's to free them spiritually. That their hearts and minds, more than their bodies, are captive to the gods of Egypt. That God is saying to the Israelites, the gods that you have worshiped for 400 years are actually the gods that are not for you. They are the gods that are holding you back. And so I wonder what it means to be freed from the gods that you and I have put our trust and our hope and our faith in. I wonder what it's like to recognize that these are gods that are not for us. They actually hold us back. They keep us captive. And so I want to ask you this as we reflect. What are the pillars of security and prosperity that you and I have just put our stock into? They may not have names like the gods the Egyptians worship. But if we're honest, Exodus doesn't really name them. I name them here, but Moses doesn't name them when he writes Exodus. He doesn't even think they're worth wasting ink upon. But I wonder what it's like for you and I. How are you and I spiritually captive to the values and the hopes of our culture? Do we make gods of the things we place our hope and trust in? Jesus talks about the deceptiveness of money and wealth. How we chase those things because we think those things bring us freedom to do what we want or security from the bad things that have happened. I can tell you right now, as soon as I found out we're getting an MRI for Micah's knees and we may need surgery, we know it's such a long wait time here in our wonderful medical system. I love our medical system, by the way. But my in-laws in the States said, maybe come to the US. So I started to think, do I need to take some money out, set some money aside for something like that? But it turns out that Micah has something that I can't solve no matter how much I throw money at. And some of us also understand what that's like, to go through a medical journey like that. That money can only go so far in protecting us, healing us, taking care of us. What are some of the things that we treat that way? And I reflect on my journey as a parent and how I look for securing prosperity and health for my children. How do I treat education or the acquisition of skills? Is this only so that these things look good on a college app? Do I treat these things, these good things, the same way that the Egyptians place faith and hope in their gods? I wonder. I'm confronted by that. For the Israelites, the plagues are God's way of purging the Egyptian pantheon of gods from their hearts. And from what we see in Exodus, we know it's a process. It doesn't happen right away. The good news is that God's rescue of us is not dependent on us getting everything right about him. All we do is cry out, he rescues us, and he invites us to begin knowing him and following him. That is the God we serve. So I just want to pause here. Lots for us to reflect on, lots for us to think about. Let me pray. Jesus, we simply come before you We thank you that we have been rescued by your cross, made new by your resurrection. We pray that the power that is at work in you and through you is in us as well. So would you help us purge from us all of the things that we hold on to that actually hold us back? Teach us to trust you. Teach us to allow you to shape us into who you want us to be. We pray this in your name. Amen.